She was homeless, cold, and singing to no one until Keanu Reeves stopped, listened, and whispered one quiet request. What he did next didn't just change her life. It sparked a movement that shook the nation. But why did he choose her, and what secret pain were they both hiding? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sky over Los Angeles hung low and heavy with clouds, the kind of gray that swallowed color from the world. On the corner of First and Grand Avenue, just outside the Walt Disney Concert Hall, a woman in a torn denim jacket sat cross-legged on the pavement, a battered guitar resting in her lap. Her name was Lena Dawson, 36, exhausted, hollow-cheeked. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days, but her fingers still remembered the music. She adjusted the strap on the guitar, careful with its worn leather edge. It was the only thing she had left from her grandfather, the man who taught her that music wasn't just notes. It was memory. It was survival. It was what kept her sane when everything else had been stripped away. The instrument's neck had a crack along the back from when it was knocked off a bench during a scuffle near a shelter. But it still held tune. It still had soul. And so did she, buried under the weight of too many hard nights. Lena's hair was tangled, falling into her face, and her jeans were stained with street dust. Her hands were raw from the cold, but she gently tuned each string with practiced care, pressing her ear close to the body of the guitar, listening for truth. The noise of downtown pulsed around her honking horns, hurried footsteps, vendors shouting into the smog, but none of it reached her. When she started to play, the world faded. She began softly, the opening chords of Hallelujah flowing like warm breath into the morning air. Her voice followed, low, aching, weathered by time, but still haunting. Each note wrapped around the next, her sound rich with sorrow and resilience. She didn't sing like someone trying to be heard. She sang like someone trying to remember who she used to be. People passed by. Some glanced, a few slowed down, most didn't look at all. She was just another homeless woman with a guitar in a city that never stopped moving. But her voice had a gravity to it, something that pulled on people's conscience, whether they wanted it to or not. Some tourists crossed the street just to avoid her corner, uncomfortable with the pain they didn't want to acknowledge. But someone didn't move. A man had stopped across the street, no phone in hand, no earbuds, no rush, just stillness. He stood with both hands in the pockets of his black coat, dark jeans, and boots scuffed from use. He wore a gray beanie pulled low over his brow, but even from a distance, there was something familiar about him. His presence wasn't flashy. It was quiet, solid, intentional. Lena didn't see him yet. She was too far into the music. Her eyes were closed, her chin tilted toward the sky. She held the final note longer than usual, letting it tremble into silence. She never asked for applause. She never opened her eyes expecting it. But this time, when the last chord faded, the air felt different, charged. When Lena finally looked up, her fingers still resting on the strings, she met his gaze for the first time. He didn't speak right away. He just nodded once. A simple gesture, but not indifferent. His eyes steady and kind, locked with hers, not the kind of gaze that judged or pitied, but one that listened. Even in silence, Lena felt heard. Then he stepped forward, slow and deliberate, crossing the wide sidewalk as a gust of wind picked up the edges of his coat. His boots made a soft sound against the concrete as he came closer, standing just a few feet away now. She braced herself, expecting the usual line. Sometimes people stopped to offer vague compliments or drop loose change with a smile that didn't quite reach their eyes. Sometimes they asked if she needed help, and sometimes they told her to move along. But that's not what he did. He tilted his head slightly, studying the worn guitar in her lap, then raised his eyes to meet hers again. "Do you know Simple Man?" he asked. 5 words, nothing more. Lena blinked, caught off guard. She hadn't heard that request in years, not since she used to play for her students, back when she still had a classroom, a paycheck, and a key to her own apartment. Simple Man was one of her grandfather's favorites, and hers too. A song about mothers and sons and choices and living with purpose. The kind of song that didn't need embellishment, just honesty. She didn't answer right away. Part of her was stunned that anyone had asked for something so specific. The other part was trying to process what she was seeing. His face. It looked so familiar now. The strong jawline, the eyes that carried decades of pain and peace at once. The voice. It couldn't be. But before her mind could catch up, her fingers were already moving across the frets. She found the first chord by instinct, then another. Then the opening melody emerged from the body of her grandfather's guitar like it had been waiting all this time. She didn't speak. She just began to sing. Take your time. Don't live too fast. Her voice was different now, lower, more focused. It wasn't just for the city or the crowd or whatever strangers might stop to listen. It was for him, for the man who had asked not, "Do you need help?" but "Do you know the song?" and Keanu Reeves, because by now there was no doubt that it was him, stood there unmoving. His hands remained tucked in his pockets, but his head slowly began to nod in rhythm with the song. A few more people started to notice whispering, pointing. Phones began to rise quietly in the background. But Keanu wasn't performing. He wasn't drawing attention to himself. He was just present. Lena could feel her voice getting stronger as she moved through the second verse. She thought of her mother, long gone, her sister somewhere out in Arizona, her old students, and the version of herself that used to dream of performing in rooms with spotlights, not alleyways with dumpsters. As she reached the chorus, her voice lifted with a quiet strength that hadn't been there in months. Be a simple kind of man. Be something you love and understand. Something shifted in the air as she sang those words, not just around her, but inside her. She hadn't felt this steady in a long time. Like the song wasn't just lyrics, but a tether pulling her back to something she thought she'd lost. Her voice cracked just slightly on the next line, but she didn't stop. She leaned into it. Let the rawness carry the message. Let it be real. Keanu didn't move, not a word, not a smile, just eyes locked on hers, listening like it mattered. When she finished the last note, the sidewalk felt unusually quiet. She let the guitar rest against her knee. Her heart was pounding, but her body stayed still. The traffic had not stopped, but the world around her seemed to hold its breath. He took a step closer. You sing like you mean it, he said. Lena gave a half laugh, half sigh. It's all I have left. Another pause. Not awkward, just full. He knelt down beside her slowly so that their eyes were level. His voice dropped lower, quieter. Almost like a secret. My name's Keanu. I know, she whispered. He looked down at her guitar, then back up. Can you come to a place tomorrow? Nothing fancy, just a little studio. Play like that for a few friends. She hesitated. Her mind filled with everything that made her want to say no. The smell in her clothes, the bruises under her sleeves, the bag of everything she owned stuffed behind her on the sidewalk. But something in his voice wasn't offering pity. It was offering dignity. Yeah, she said. I think I can. Keanu reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small card and a folded bill. He held them out but didn't force them on her. Just a name and address, he said, and enough to get a warm meal and a safe night. She stared at the items in his hand, then back at his face. What's the catch? She asked, her voice low. No catch, he said. Just don't stop singing. Then he stood and nodded once and disappeared into the crowd like he'd never been there. Lena looked down at the card. Dog Star Studios, 3 p.m., come as you are. And for the first time in years, she felt the smallest flicker of something close to hope. Lena Dawson hadn't always sung on the street. Not long ago, she had a key that opened a small but bright apartment in East Hollywood. She had a car, a regular paycheck, and a room full of children who called her Miss Dawson and begged to stay after class. She was the choir teacher at Roosevelt Middle School, her dream job. Every morning, she used to walk into her classroom and breathe in the scent of dry erase markers, paper sheet music, and the faded linoleum that had seen decades of little feet dancing to rhythm exercises. There were colorful posters on the walls, inspirational quotes in bold letters, and laminated photos of student performances. It wasn't much, but to Lena, it was everything. She loved those kids like they were her own. Sixth graders who couldn't carry a tune until they found their confidence. Seventh graders with voices that cracked mid-performance and burst into laughter. Eighth graders who sang with fire in their chests after heartbreaks they didn't yet understand. Some of them didn't have much at home, but in Lena's classroom they had safety, harmony, pride. And then the letters came. First, the warning about district-wide budget cuts, then the notification that arts programs were being reduced, then the meeting, then the final decision. Her job was gone. She packed up her classroom on a rainy Friday quietly. No big goodbye, no send-off. Just a worn folder of lesson plans, a desk drawer full of goodbye notes written by students, and the unbearable silence of a room that used to echo with music. She went home that night, put her hands on her grandfather's guitar, and didn't play a single note. Not yet. Her father died 3 months later, heart failure sudden, no warning. The medical bills from his final week were astronomical. She tried to manage them, tried to keep up with rent, groceries, and COBRA insurance, but the math didn't add up. Her savings disappeared like water in her hands. She sold her car, then her furniture, then her keyboard. By the time she missed 2 months of rent, her landlord gave her a choice: move out quietly or be evicted and blacklisted. She left quietly. The first night she slept in a shelter, she cried into her guitar case like a child. The second night, she didn't cry. She started to disappear slowly, almost politely, into a world she once thought she'd never touch. Lena learned the rules of the street the way some people learn a new instrument, slowly, painfully, one note at a time. At first, she stayed near the churches that offered evening meals. There was an unspoken code among the women in line. Keep your head down. Guard your bag. Don't talk too much. And above all, don't show weakness. She watched herself disappear in bathroom mirrors that hadn't been cleaned in weeks. The woman staring back looked older than 38. Her cheeks hollowed, her hands rougher. Her eyes lost some of their light. She wrapped her guitar in 3 layers of cloth and carried it, like it was still worth something. Like she was still worth something. She began to sing on street corners out of necessity. At first, it was just humming soft, shy notes under her breath, barely audible. But one day outside the entrance to a farmer's market, she saw a man playing an old harmonica. He nodded toward her guitar. "You know how to play?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Well, don't waste the sun. Play." So she did. Her fingers trembled as they touched the strings, rusty but familiar. The first song she played was "Somewhere Over the Rainbow." A little girl dropped $1 into her case. Her mother followed with a 5. By the end of the afternoon, she had earned $18.53. It wasn't much, but it was the first time in months she felt something besides despair. She felt the vibration of the strings in her chest. She felt the pulse of the street around her. She felt, if only for a moment, seen. That night, she sat on the curb outside a closed laundromat and counted her money. She didn't cry. Instead, she smiled, for the first time in what felt like forever. From then on, Lena staked out spots around the city. Mornings near coffee shops, afternoons near metro stations, Sundays in front of a downtown church. People came and went. Some ignored her. Others nodded in appreciation. A few filmed her with their phones, but never looked her in the eye. She didn't care about going viral. She cared about surviving. And every dollar in that case was a note toward freedom. Her voice grew stronger with each day. She learned which songs made people pause, which ones made them dig into their pockets, which ones made them cry. She sang old gospel hymns, classic rock ballads, even show tunes when kids passed by. But her favorite, a simple lullaby her mother used to hum while brushing her hair. She'd sing it softly on quiet mornings when no one was around. It was on one of those quiet mornings barely past sunrise when she noticed a man standing across the street watching her. He wore sunglasses and a plain black hoodie. His hands were tucked into his jacket. He didn't move. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. She had no idea that man was Keanu Reeves. She didn't see him again for a few days, but something about the way he had stood there, calm, unmoving, not filming her, stayed in her memory. Most people walked past her like she was a stain on the sidewalk. The rest tossed coins like penance, eyes averted. But he had watched her like her music mattered, like it told him something he'd been needing to hear. Lena had stopped trying to guess people's intentions a long time ago. She'd learned that most faces didn't mean what they showed. She stopped expecting kindness from strangers because it usually came with strings. But something about the stillness in his posture, the quiet focus, it had felt different, intentional, familiar in the way grief is familiar to those who carry it every day. That night she slept behind the alley of a shuttered bookstore off Hill Street, curled between two recycling bins, the guitar resting against her chest like a shield. It wasn't safe. It was never truly safe. But she had learned how to blend in with the shadows, how to disappear when danger walked too close. She'd learned the names of street cleaners and security guards who looked the other way when they saw her. She'd also learned how to wash herself quickly with paper towels in public restrooms, how to scrub her hands and face with soap when it was available, how to keep her clothes from smelling too strong, how to brush her teeth at the water fountain in the park without drawing too much attention. Every day was a series of calculated choices: where to sleep, where to be seen, where to be invisible. But each night, no matter how cold it got, she would strum her guitar before sleeping, even just for a minute, even with numb fingers. The guitar was her thread back to the world, back to who she used to be. It was a 1971 Gibson Hummingbird acoustic sunburst finish, long faded. The pickguard scratched the frets, worn to bare metal in places. Her grandfather used to play it during church gatherings and civil rights marches in the Deep South. He told her once that this guitar had heard more prayers than most pulpits. When he died, he left it to her with a note tucked inside the case. "Music is what God gave us when we ran out of words." Lena had read that note 100 times. Sometimes she wondered if she kept singing for survival, or because she was still chasing his voice in every chord. She didn't know that in less than 24 hours, the man who had watched her silently would return and nothing about her life would ever be the same again. But that night, she lay beneath a thin blanket, the city buzzing beyond the alley walls, her guitar resting against her chest like a heartbeat. And somewhere just down the block, Keanu Reeves was already thinking about the voice that had stopped him cold in the middle of Los Angeles. The morning air carried a heavy chill, the kind that settled in your bones and didn't leave until well past noon. Lena sat on her usual corner outside the Walt Disney Concert Hall, guitar resting across her lap, fingers stiff from the cold. She strummed softly, mostly to herself. She didn't expect coins today. She didn't expect much of anything. She'd been singing "A Change Is Gonna Come," her voice barely rising above the sound of passing traffic. She liked that song. It felt like a prayer disguised as a protest. The world didn't always change, but sometimes people did. Halfway through the second verse, she noticed him, the man from yesterday. He stood across the street again, hands tucked into the pockets of a dark gray jacket, shoulders relaxed, head slightly tilted, as if listening not just to the notes but to everything between them. Lena kept singing, uncertain whether to acknowledge him or not. She finished the song without looking directly at him. When the last chord faded, she glanced up and he was walking toward her. Her chest tightened. Not with fear, but something close to confusion. People didn't come back. They didn't stop twice. And they never ever sat down beside her. But he did. He lowered himself slowly onto the curb, folding his long legs beneath him like it was the most normal thing in the world. The street buzzed around them, cars passing, conversations floating, but in that small circle of space, time softened. He didn't speak for a while, just rested his elbows on his knees and looked ahead. Lena watched him from the corner of her eye. His face was familiar now that she really studied it. Not just from the movies, but from the news, from magazine covers left in cafe trash bins. But he didn't carry himself like a celebrity. No sunglasses, no entourage, just a man with quiet eyes. Finally, she spoke. "You're back." He nodded once. "You sounded different today." She raised an eyebrow. "Different bad." He gave a small smile. "Different deeper." That made her pause. People usually said things like beautiful or raw or unexpected. No one ever said deeper, like he could hear the ache beneath the melody. She looked away, uncomfortable with how seen she felt. "You always just show up to street corners and listen to broken people sing," she asked. "Only when they stop me in my tracks." There was no flirtation in his tone, no performance, just truth, plain and simple. She didn't know what to do with that. She was startled to see him again the next day. Same corner, same faded jacket. This time he brought nothing but a quiet presence and a paper coffee cup for himself. He didn't hover. He didn't film. Just listened. The world around them was its usual blur of footsteps, sirens, and indifference. But Keanu sat down slowly on the curb beside her, folding his long legs as if he belonged there. Lena paused, mid-verse, unsure. "You came back," she said quietly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her voice carried a hint of suspicion. Life had taught her not to expect anything to return. Not people, not luck, not dreams. Keanu gave a small nod, smiling with his eyes. "You're a beautiful singer," he said. "Didn't want to miss the encore." She gave a soft, guarded laugh. "Most people just throw $1 and avoid eye contact." "I'm not most people," he replied gently, "and you're not just a street singer." She studied him now, not as a celebrity, but as a man. His face wasn't painted with pity, just presence, real attention, the kind she hadn't felt in years. "You know," she said, after a pause, "I used to think music would save me, but then I had to use it just to survive." Keanu looked down for a moment. Then he said, "I know that feeling." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite trust, but a crack in the armor. They sat like that for a while, saying little, letting the traffic pass, letting time settle. Then softly he asked, "What's your story?" "Lena?" She winced slightly at the question. Most people asked out of curiosity. He asked with care, like someone who understood stories could carry scars. Lena sighed. "I was in a band once," she began, eyes watching a distant memory. "Indie folk stuff. We played little venues, cafes, even had a label interested. Then came the drinking. My boyfriend, the drummer, took off with my car. My apartment burned down, and somewhere along the way, the music stopped being fun. It just became noise I had to make to stay alive." Keanu nodded. "I know what it's like to lose everything," he said. She turned slightly. There was something honest in his voice. Not performative, not rehearsed. "What about you?" she asked. "You some kind of music scout?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Something like that," he said. "I've made a few movies, but music, that's my first language too." Lena's eyes narrowed. "Wait a minute." He pulled off his beanie, and that's when she saw it, his face fully. The hair, the jawline, the unmistakable calm in his gaze. Her breath hitched. "You're Keanu Reeves?" He didn't confirm it with words. He just smiled. Lena turned the card over in her fingers like it might vanish if she blinked. It was thick and elegant, the kind of card you didn't throw away. In small, neat print, it read, "Dogstar Studios tomorrow at 3 p.m. Come as you are." There was no address, no instructions, just that one line like a whisper in the dark, like someone had seen straight through the dirt, on her skin, the tears in her voice, and still believed there was something worth showing up for. She didn't cry, not right away. She just held the card and stared out into the evening traffic, cars blurring by people going home, people with places to be, the kind of people she used to be before everything cracked open. Before the fire, the hospital visits, the eviction notices, the silence from people who once called her talented. The card didn't feel like a rescue. It felt like a dare. Come as you are. No promises, no money. No pity, just a door maybe. Just a window cracked open in a sealed room. She didn't sleep much that night. Too many questions crowded her mind. Was it real? What kind of place was Dogstar Studios? Why her? And why would a man like Keanu Reeves, a Hollywood actor, a name she only knew from whispers and glances, be sitting on a cold curb next to a woman who hadn't showered in 3 days talking about music like it still mattered? She stared at the mirror in the gas station bathroom early the next morning, fingers trembling as she ran a wet napkin over her face. The reflection didn't offer much comfort. Her curls were tangled. Her hoodie had a coffee stain from 2 days ago. Her boots had holes near the toes. But something in her eyes had shifted. She wasn't going to show up looking perfect, but she was going to show up. When she arrived outside the address scribbled in tiny ink on the back of the card, a barely visible line added by Keanu. Before he handed it to her, she hesitated at the gate. Dogstar Studios was tucked in the back of a quiet industrial block, unassuming from the outside. No neon lights, no red carpets, just a small sign above a black steel door and the hum of something alive on the other side. Her fingers hovered over the buzzer. She almost didn't press it, but then she remembered his voice. Calm, patient, real. So she pressed it. A few seconds later, the door clicked open. She stepped inside. It smelled like wood strings and silence, the kind of silence musicians knew. Not emptiness, but potential. The hallway walls were lined with black and white photos of artists' old concert posters and handwritten notes pinned behind glass. Someone had lived in this place with intention. As she turned the corner, soft guitar chords filtered through a half-open studio door. Not a soundtrack, not a show, just someone playing, feeling. Keanu sat on a low stool back to her, strumming quietly. No entourage, no fanfare, just him. He looked up when he heard her, and smiled, not with surprise, not with triumph, just with quiet recognition, like he'd expected her to come, like he believed she would. "You made it," he said. She nodded, still unsure if this was a dream. "I told you," he added, setting the guitar down gently. "Music's my first language, too." She swallowed hard. "I don't know why I'm here." He didn't respond right away, just stood and motioned toward the chair across from him. "Maybe," he said, "you're here to remember who you are." Lena walked for nearly an hour after leaving Dogstar Studios, the card still clutched between her fingers as if it might dissolve if she loosened her grip. The sun had started to set, streaking orange and pink across the sky, but she barely noticed. Her mind replayed everything. Keanu's calm eyes, his steady voice, the quiet invitation. She didn't trust it. She wanted to. But life had taught her that good things often came with a hidden price. She stopped beneath a street lamp and opened the envelope fully for the first time. Along with the studio card, folded neatly inside, was a crisp $100 bill. Her stomach tightened. It had been years since she held that much money in a single moment. She looked around, half expecting someone to jump out and snatch it away, but the sidewalk was empty, except for a stray cat darting into a bush. She didn't know what he expected her to do with the money. Maybe food, maybe a clean shirt, maybe a night without fear. The thought of sleeping in a real bed felt almost unreal, but she also knew she couldn't show up at a real studio looking the way she did, not because of shame, but because she wanted to respect the invitation. She wanted to show up like someone whose voice mattered. So she walked toward a rundown motel she'd passed many times, but never dared approach. The sign flickered with missing bulbs, and the parking lot had more cracks than pavement. But the windows had curtains, and the office light was on. A small bell chimed when she entered. Behind the counter sat an older Korean man with silver hair and heavy glasses. He looked up from his newspaper with a calm, measured expression. "Room?" he asked. She hesitated. "Just one night." He nodded, typing slowly into a computer that looked nearly as old as the building. When he quoted the price, her breath caught in her throat. It was almost exactly the amount Keanu had given her. Not a coincidence, she realized. He had known what a room would cost. He had planned this. She handed over the money, and the man gave her a key attached to a faded plastic tag. As she turned to leave, he noticed the guitar case hanging over her shoulder. "You play?" he asked. "A little," she said. He smiled softly, something warm passing through his eyes. "Music saved my daughter's life," he said. "You take care of that guitar. It will take care of you." She didn't know how to reply. She just nodded and walked to her room. Inside, the air smelled of detergent and something floral. The bedspread was worn, but clean. The bathroom had real towels, hot water, a mirror that wasn't cracked. She stood in front of it for several seconds before reaching up to touch the reflection as if she needed to confirm she was still there. The shower steamed the small room as she stepped under the water. Dirt swirled down the drain in dark streams. Her hair loosened her skin, warmed, and layer by layer the weight of the streets washed away. When she wrapped herself in a towel afterward, she felt light, vulnerable, human. She put on the secondhand clothes she'd bought from the thrift shop next door, a soft blue sweater and clean black jeans. Nothing fancy. But everything felt different in them. She looked like a version of herself she thought had disappeared forever. That night, she lay in the motel bed, hugging her grandfather's guitar to her chest. The sheets were cool. The pillow cradled her head gently. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, her last thought before sleep wasn't fear. It was hope. Lena woke before sunrise, wrapped in warmth she wasn't used to. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. The sheets were soft. The air was still. No footsteps outside her door. No clatter of bottles rolling down an alley. Just a quiet hum from the old heater beneath the window. It felt unreal, like she'd stepped into someone else's life. Then she saw her guitar resting on the chair beside the bed and remembered everything. Dogstar Studios. Tomorrow at 3. Come as you are. She sat up slowly, letting the reality of the moment settle. It had been months since she'd slept on anything other than concrete cardboard or cold tile. Her body didn't ache the way it usually did in the morning. The relief was so foreign it almost frightened her. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. She didn't want this feeling to end too quickly. When she finally stood, she approached the mirror above the dresser. Her reflection stared back at her with a mixture of disbelief and something she hadn't seen in years. Softness. The faintest glow of a woman who used to laugh easily. The blue sweater hugged her frame gently, and her curls clean now fell around her shoulders without the matted heaviness of the past months. She touched her cheeks, still slightly flushed from warm water and real sleep. She wasn't the teacher she used to be. She wasn't polished or glamorous, but she also wasn't invisible. Not today, not anymore. She left the room briefly and walked to the small store near the motel office. The owner from last night was restocking a shelf of instant noodles. He looked up surprised, but pleased to see her again. "You look refreshed," he said. "I feel like a different person," she admitted. He nodded toward her guitar case. "You must play something good today." She smiled shyly. "I hope so." He set down the box in his hands. "My daughter played violin. She had a hard time in school. Kids made fun of her accent. Music gave her courage, gave her a home inside her own chest." Lena swallowed hard. "Did she keep playing always?" he said proudly. "Now she teaches, just like you used to." "Yes." Lena paused, stunned. "How did you know?" "You have teacher eyes," he replied warmly. "Kind eyes, eyes that listen." The words struck something deep inside her, a truth she had forgotten. She thanked him, bought a bottle of water and a granola bar, and returned to her room. She set the bottle beside the bed, opened the curtains fully, and let the morning light settle over her. She picked up her guitar and strummed gently. The notes were clear. The wood felt alive beneath her fingertips. Her grandfather's spirit seemed to vibrate in every string, reminding her that music wasn't just something she did. It was who she was. As she practiced quietly in the sunlit room, she felt something forming inside her, a mix of fear and anticipation. She didn't know what would happen at the studio. She didn't know if this was an opportunity or just a fleeting moment of kindness. But for the first time in nearly 2 years, she wanted to find out. Lena set her guitar down gently as the afternoon sun shifted across the room, warming her face. She hadn't planned to stay inside this long, but the safety of the space wrapped around her like a blanket she wasn't ready to let go of. She stretched out on the bed again, sinking into the mattress with a slow exhale. It felt unreal to be held by something soft. Her whole body, usually tense and braced for interruption, slowly unwound. For years, she had lived in survival mode. Every decision had been about staying alive, staying warm, staying unnoticed. But now, lying in the quiet motel room, she felt a different kind of stillness, one that wasn't tied to fear, a stillness that made room for possibility. She turned her head toward the mirror on the wall. The woman reflected there wasn't the polished teacher she once was, but she wasn't the ghost she had become either. Her eyes were brighter. Her shoulders sat a little higher. The blue sweater made her look like she belonged somewhere again. She whispered softly, "Maybe this is the start." She hugged the guitar to her chest once more, feeling the familiar weight and memory. Tomorrow seemed both terrifying and beautiful. She wasn't naive enough to believe all her problems would disappear, but showing up at Dogstar Studios meant she hadn't completely given up on herself. It meant someone had seen more in her than survival. As evening settled in, she closed her eyes again, letting her breath slow, letting the mattress hold her. She didn't know what awaited her at 3 o'clock the next day, but she knew one thing with quiet certainty. She would walk through that door, and she would come as she was. Lena arrived at Dogstar Studios 15 minutes early, her hands shaking as she gripped the neck of her guitar. The building looked modest from the outside, almost hidden among old brick warehouses and converted art spaces. But the closer she stepped, the more she could feel something humming beneath the walls. Purpose. Music. A heartbeat that wasn't hers, but welcomed her anyway. She took a breath and pressed the buzzer. The door clicked open. Inside, warm lights glowed softly along the hallway, casting a gentle amber tone onto wooden floors. Framed album covers lined the walls, not flashy or pretentious, but personal. Dogstar posters from the 90s, flyers from charity concerts, photographs of Keanu with his bandmates laughing, heads thrown back, instruments in hand. The air smelled faintly of cedar and guitar strings, and something inside her chest loosened. A woman with short brown hair and round glasses approached from the end of the hall. She wore a simple black t-shirt, jeans, and a lanyard with a studio badge. "You must be Lena," she said warmly. "I'm Marla. Keanu told us you were coming." Lena blinked. "He told you about me?" "Only that your voice stopped him cold," Marla said with a grin. "That doesn't happen often." The words hit Lena with a force she wasn't prepared for. She opened her mouth to answer, but her voice died in her throat. Marla placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Come on. The team's waiting in Studio 4. Waiting. The word felt surreal. Lena followed her through another hallway until they reached a wide glass door marked with a simple metal plate. Studio 4. When Marla pushed it open, Lena's breath hitched. The room was bathed in warm, light walls, padded with acoustic panels, cables, neatly coiled microphones standing at attention. 3 people sat behind a mixing console, 2 sound engineers and a guitarist. Their faces were relaxed, curious, open. And Keanu stood near the center of the room, tuning a bass guitar. He looked up the moment she stepped inside, his expression softening into that same gentle recognition she'd seen on the street corner. "You made it," he said. Her throat tightened. "Yeah, I made it." He set the bass down and walked toward her, hands in his pockets, as if giving her space to breathe. "I'm glad you're here," he said. "We're working on a tribute album, stories and voices that usually go unheard. When I heard you, I knew you had something this project needed." Lena felt her heartbeat pounding in her ears. "I don't know if I belong here." Keanu's smile didn't falter. "You belong exactly where your voice leads you." Marla guided Lena toward the vocal booth. The glass glinted softly as Lena stepped inside, her hand brushing the foam panels. A microphone waited at the center. A pair of headphones rested on a hook. Everything felt fragile and sacred. Keanu stood on the other side of the glass. "Take your time," he said. No pressure. But her palms were already sweating. She hadn't recorded anything in years, not since before her world collapsed, not since she still believed she had a life ahead of her. Marla's voice sounded gently through the headphones. "We'll start whenever you're ready." Lena swallowed hard. Ready wasn't a feeling she'd known in a long time, but she lifted the guitar, rested it against her thigh, and let her fingers find the first chord. The first chord rang out softer than she intended. Her fingers hesitated, almost trembling, and she tightened her grip to steady herself. She was suddenly aware of every flaw she carried: the second-hand shirt that didn't quite fit right, the frayed strap on her guitar case, the faint marks on her hands from cold nights spent gripping concrete instead of sheet music. She forced herself to breathe. Marla adjusted a dial on the console. "Levels are good. Play whenever you want." But Lena didn't move right away. She looked through the glass at Keanu. He wasn't leaning or fidgeting or checking his phone. He was just there, present, focused, kind, the kind of attention that made a person feel seen without feeling judged. She strummed again. This time the sound bloomed brighter, fuller. The studio carried it gently, as though the walls themselves leaned in to listen. She closed her eyes and let another chord follow, then a third, until the melody settled into something warm and familiar. "Let's try the first track." Keanu said, his voice low through the speaker. "The song we talked about. Something raw, something real." Lena nodded slowly. She took a breath deep enough to steady her ribs, lifted her chin, and began to sing. The first line cracked, not badly, not off pitch, but with a tremor that exposed everything she'd been holding together. Shame coursed through her. She braced for a disappointed sigh from the control room or a whispered comment, but none came. Keanu spoke softly. "Let it crack if it needs to. That's the truth in it." The words didn't feel like encouragement. They felt like permission. She tried again. This time, the note didn't crack, it opened. It carried the ache of 2 years without a home. It carried the weight of her father's hospital bills. It carried the echo of her students' laughter that still lived in her memory like a ghost. The room fell still. Her voice grew steadier, finding the shape of the melody, like it had been waiting for her spine to straighten. She sang without thinking about the microphone, the engineers, or the famous man listening. She sang because the song demanded to be sung. When she reached the chorus, her voice swelled into something larger than she expected. A rising warmth filled her chest, a trembling that wasn't fear anymore. It was release. She ended the final note by letting it fade naturally, holding her breath as it dissolved into the room. Silence followed. Not the cold silence of disinterest, the charged silence of a moment heavy enough to shift a life. In the control room, the younger engineer blinked rapidly and cleared his throat as if caught off guard. The older engineer leaned back in his chair, eyebrows lifted, jaw slack. Keanu pressed the intercom button. That first take. That wasn't just singing. That was a whole story. Lena's throat tightened. She shook her head in disbelief. "I can do better," she whispered. "No, you can do deeper," he replied gently. "But what you just did, that came from the place people spend their whole lives trying to reach." Her pulse thudded softly in her ears. She thought she had lost that place. Marla's voice chimed in through the headphones. "Let's take a moment. When you're ready, we'll try again. There's no rush." Lena lowered the guitar into her lap and wiped her palms on her jeans. She hadn't expected kindness here. She hadn't expected respect. For so long, she had braced herself for dismissal, for the impatient sighs of people who wanted her to hurry, or be quiet, or disappear. But here, every person in the room was making space for her. Here, she wasn't invisible. She lifted her eyes again and met Keanu's through the glass. He nodded once, a simple gesture that said more than words. "Take your time. Your voice matters. You belong here." She inhaled, preparing for another attempt, and this time she felt ready. Lena lifted the guitar again, her fingers steadier now. She took one slow breath, then another, letting the air settle in her chest. When she began the second take, the room seemed to fold inward as if every sound softened to make space for her voice. This time, she didn't hold anything back. Her voice rose with a rawness she had never allowed herself to feel in front of an audience. Each note carried the weight of nights spent alone, the echo of classrooms she once filled with laughter, The loss, the hope, the fight to still be standing. Her voice wasn't polished, it wasn't flawless, but it was alive. When the final chord settled, no one moved. Then the older engineer leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's not singing, she's telling the truth." Lena's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not as someone surviving, but as someone creating, someone offering something real. Keanu stepped toward the glass with the softest smile. That, he said, is the first track. And Lena felt something unfold inside her, something she thought she had lost forever. A beginning. Lena stepped out of the vocal booth, with trembling hands, still feeling the echo of her last note humming inside her ribs. She had expected doubt, maybe a polite thank you for trying. She had not expected the stunned silence that followed. She had not expected grown men behind the soundboard to sit completely still, eyes wide, as though they had just witnessed something sacred. Keanu offered her a cup of water, his expression calm but lit with quiet pride. "There's something I want you to try," he said. "An original. One my bandmate wrote a long time ago. It's called Better Than Silence." She repeated the title softly. The words felt heavy but beautiful. "What's it about being unseen?" he said. "Being the person everyone walks past without ever looking. The person who holds on anyway." Her throat tightened. "I know that song," she whispered, though she had never heard it. "I've lived it." He nodded as if he understood every layer of what she meant. They handed her a printed sheet with the lyrics. The page smelled faintly of ink and coffee. She read the first verse slowly. Each line felt like a hand reaching into her chest, pulling out memories she tried not to revisit. Nights spent huddled behind dumpsters. Mornings washing her face in gas station sinks. The sting of being treated like a ghost. She looked up at Keanu with a raw vulnerability she could no longer hide. Are you sure you want me to sing this?" "No," he said gently. "I think the song wants you to sing it." The bandmate who'd written it, Daniel, a quiet man with salt and pepper hair and a soft gaze, stepped forward with his guitar. "This wasn't meant to be a hit," he said. "It was meant to be honest. And you sing honest better than anyone I've ever heard." Lena swallowed hard. Compliments used to bounce off her, unable to penetrate the armor she built around herself. But in this room with these people, she felt something shift, something soften. These weren't empty words. These were people who had listened, really listened. They began with a simple acoustic arrangement. Daniel strummed a steady pattern, while Lena followed the melody on the lyric sheet. The opening notes were fragile, like glass under her tongue, but her voice found its shape, slowly climbing into the spaces between the chords. The first chorus hit her unexpectedly, and her voice cracked not from lack of control, but from truth. Daniel looked up at Keanu, and Keanu nodded. They kept recording. On the second pass, the trembling eased. Her voice deepened warmer. She leaned into the lines describing loneliness, letting her breath carry the weight of people overlooked by society. People like her, people still sleeping on sidewalks 1 block away from glowing city billboards. When she reached the bridge, something changed. Her voice rose in a way neither she nor the engineers expected. It wasn't loud, it wasn't polished, but it vibrated with a kind of dignity that made the room hold completely still. Marla pressed a hand to her chest. Daniel stopped strumming when the final chord settled. The younger sound engineer pushed his chair back and ran a hand over his face, speechless. Keanu stepped forward, eyes shining with emotion he didn't try to hide. That, he said quietly, is the version the world needs to hear. Lena looked down at the lyric sheet, her fingers trembling again, but this time from something different, something brighter. "Was it really that good?" she whispered. "It was true," Daniel said, "and true hits deeper than perfect." Lena sat on the small couch in the corner of Studio 4 while the engineers replayed the track through the monitors. She listened as her own voice filled the room, weaving through the acoustic guitar and soft background harmonies. It didn't sound like the woman who slept behind recycling bins. It didn't sound like the woman who whispered songs to herself to stay warm on cold nights. It sounded like someone who had survived. Her breath caught as she heard the tremble in the first verse, the strain in the second, the rising strength in the bridge. Every moment she had lived during the past 2 years felt stitched into the melody. She wondered if it was too exposed, too vulnerable, too much of her truth laid bare for strangers to hear. Keanu approached quietly and sat beside her, elbows resting on his knees. He didn't look at her at first. He let her listen. "You hear that?" he asked softly. She nodded, unable to speak. "That's someone fighting to be remembered." Her eyes watered. "It's strange hearing myself like that. I don't recognize that person." "That's because you're hearing the part of you didn't let die," he said gently. "Most people can't hold on to that. But you did." She looked down at her hands, still trembling. "What do I do with it now?" He cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. "We don't release anything without your permission. You decide what happens to this song. We can keep it just for us. Or," he paused, giving her room to breathe, "we can let the world hear it." Lena's heart tightened. The idea of strangers listening to her voice, her story, her brokenness, it terrified her. But the thought of keeping it hidden felt wrong too. She remembered the motel owner's daughter, the students she once taught, the women she passed every day on the street holding cardboard signs that said things like, "Please don't forget me." "What if people judge me?" she whispered. "They will judge," Keanu said softly. "Some will misunderstand you. Some will try to turn your story into something it's not." He paused. "But others will hear exactly what we heard today, and they'll feel less alone." The room grew quiet again. The engineers rewound the track for another listen, and the opening chords drifted gently through the speakers. Lena closed her eyes. She heard the cold nights. She heard the hunger. She heard the hope she didn't know had survived. She heard the voice of a woman she wished she could have been brave enough to protect. When she opened her eyes, Keanu was watching her with a look that wasn't pity, but respect. "I don't want fame," she said. "I know. I don't want to become a story people use to make themselves feel better." "You won't," he assured her. She took a shaky breath. "Then I want the song to do something real, something that matters." "It will," he said, "but only if you want it to." She looked back at the console where the track continued playing, feeling every note press against her heart. She thought about the people sleeping under bridges just miles from here. She thought about the young girls who felt invisible, the single mothers trying to hold their families together, the men who hid their despair behind forced smiles. "If it helps even one woman sleeping in the cold tonight," she said softly, "then let's share it." A hush fell across the studio. The decision settled like warm light in the room. Keanu nodded once deeply. "Then we'll release it, and we'll release it your way." The engineers exchanged glances, energized by the moment. Daniel stood up with a proud smile. "It's going to change lives," he said. Lena exhaled steady for the first time since she'd entered the studio. "Then, let's begin." They moved into the smaller editing suite to film a simple acoustic take of the song. No makeup, no staged lighting, just Lena, her guitar, and the truth in her voice. Marla held a single camera steady and close, capturing the rawness of the moment. Lena sang softly at first, then, with growing strength, letting the lyrics rest in the quiet room like a confession. When the final note faded, Keanu nodded toward Marla. "Post it. No hashtags, no titles. Let the honesty speak for itself." Lena felt her stomach twist as the clip uploaded. A part of her wanted to pull the plug, to shut the laptop, to hide, before the world could react. But another part, the part that had survived the streets, knew this was necessary. They stayed at the studio until late evening, talking, mixing, drinking cheap tea from paper cups. By the time Lena returned to the motel and lay on the bed, exhaustion pulled her into sleep almost instantly. When she woke the next morning, her phone buzzed with notifications she didn't recognize. Marla's message read, "You need to see this." The video had 700,000 views, and rising. Lena stared at the motel ceiling, still half asleep, when her phone buzzed again. At first, she thought it was a wrong number or a spam message. No one texted her anymore. No one even had her number except the studio team. But the buzzing didn't stop. It grew louder, faster, more insistent, until she finally reached for the phone with a groggy hand. There were dozens of notifications, then hundreds. Her lock screen was covered in previews of messages, tags, shares, and comments from accounts she didn't recognize. For a moment, she wondered if the world had made some mistake. She rubbed her eyes, sat up, and opened the first message. It was from Marla. "You're trending. Everywhere. Call me." Lena's heart pounded. She opened the video link attached to the message. It showed her sitting in Studio 4 with her guitar singing Better Than Silence. Just as they recorded it. Unpolished. Honest. Every line she'd sung from the broken place behind her ribs was there exposed to the world. The view count was no longer in the thousands. It wasn't even in the hundreds of thousands. It was climbing past 1 million. She covered her mouth, shock freezing her in place. She scrolled to the comments. A verified account from a famous singer wrote, "I can't stop listening. Who is this woman? This voice feels like truth." A teenage girl in Chicago had posted a duet, her own trembly voice layered beside Lena's. Her caption read, "She sings what I've never been brave enough to say." There were comments from nurses, teachers, truck drivers, single moms, musicians, and people she had never imagined would find her. But one message stopped her cold. An Iraq War veteran from Kansas had written, "Her voice made me cry for the first time in 10 years. I didn't know I still could." Lena set the phone down as tears gathered in her eyes. Her voice, the same voice she once used to comfort anxious students and fill empty classrooms, had reached people she had never met in places she had never been. She wasn't invisible anymore. But the sudden attention also terrified her. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know how to hold herself in a world that suddenly wanted something from her. Before panic could settle too deeply, someone knocked on her motel room door. She froze. Another knock. Gentle. Familiar. "Lena, it's me." She opened the door slowly. Keanu stood in the dim morning light, wearing a hoodie, jeans, and that same calm expression she'd seen on the street corner. His eyes held warmth, not surprise, as if he'd expected this moment. "You saw it?" he asked softly. She nodded, still unable to form words. "The world needed your voice," he said. "I just happened to hear it first." Those words broke her. Not in a painful way, but in the way a locked door breaks open when someone finally finds the right key. She stepped back and let him inside. He glanced around the small room without judgment, then turned to face her. "I came because I want to make sure you're okay," he said. Going viral can feel overwhelming, even when it's for the right reasons. She sank onto the edge of the bed. "I don't know what to do with all this." "You don't have to know today," he replied. "But I have something I want to offer you. Something steady. Something that belongs to you." She looked up, heart pounding. He sat across from her, hands clasped gently. "I have a small label. It's not flashy. It's not corporate. It's focused on artists who carry stories the world usually ignores. We call it Voices Unheard." The name alone made her eyes sting. "I want you to join us," he said. "A partnership. Full creative control. Your songs, your stories, your truth. And if you want mentorship, protection, stability, I'll be here for that too." Lena's breath caught in her throat. Nothing in her life had prepared her for a moment like this. Lena stared at Keanu, unable to speak. The words, "voices unheard," echoed through her mind like a distant anthem, a phrase that felt carved from her own experiences. She clasped her hands together to steady them, but they continued trembling. She wasn't used to choices. Homelessness didn't offer choices. It offered survival. And now here she was, being offered a partnership, a path, a future. "I don't know how to be this," she whispered. "A singer, an artist people care about." Keanu leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "You already are those things. You were before the video. The world is just catching up to you." She looked at him, unsure how to process that kind of belief. It felt too large and too gentle at the same time. "People online," she began. "They're responding to your truth, not to a performance," he said. "There's a difference. You didn't sing to impress them. You sang because you had something to say. That's why it's resonating." The thought made her chest tighten. She reached for her phone again, scrolling through the flood of comments. Some messages were long paragraphs. Others were simple sentences like, "Thank you for this. I needed this today," or "I feel seen." One comment from a woman in Detroit read, "I've been clean for 14 months, and this song reminded me why I fought for my life." Another from a widowed father said, "My daughter and I listened together. She asked me what heartbreak sounds like. I told her it sounds like a woman still standing." The weight of it all pressed into Lena with both heaviness and hope. "These people don't know me," she murmured. "But they hear you," Keanu replied. She set the phone down with trembling fingers. What if I disappoint them? What if I can't do this again? What if this was just one lucky moment? Keanu took a slow breath, letting the silence settle comfortably before speaking. Art isn't about repeating perfection. It's about showing up honestly every time you create something. You don't owe anyone perfection. You don't owe anyone a miracle. You only owe yourself the chance to keep going. The steadiness in his tone grounded her. She felt her shoulders relax slightly. "You won't be doing this alone," he continued. "Our label is small, but we take care of our own. We'll give you space to grow, real mentorship, real support, not contracts you can't understand or pressure you can't survive. You'll have full control over your work." Lena blinked back fresh tears. "Why me?" Keanu paused, considering his answer. "Because you remind people of what strength really looks like. Quiet strength, real strength. And music needs that voice right now." His words didn't feel like flattery. They felt like truth, a truth she had not allowed herself to believe. A knock sounded on the door, and Lena tensed until she heard Marla's voice calling softly, "It's just me." When she entered, her face was lit with excitement, but she kept her tone gentle. "You're at 1.8 million views," she said, "and major labels are already trying to find your name. We're ignoring them, of course." Lena's stomach flipped. Before she could panic, Marla placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You don't need the world," Marla said. "You just need the right people around you." Lena glanced between Marla and Keanu. These were people who had asked nothing of her. People who had listened when she had nothing to offer except a voice shaped by hardship. "What if I say yes?" Lena asked quietly. Keanu smiled, a soft expression filled with respect rather than celebration. "Then we begin on your terms, your pace, your vision, and if I say no, then we're still here," he said. "As friends, as support, as people who see you." The motel room felt small, but the decision felt impossibly large. Lena clasped her necklace, a thin chain she kept tucked under her shirt, and took a deep breath. "Let me think," she whispered. "Take all the time you need," Keanu replied, but even as she said the words, a part of her already knew. Lena stepped to the window, watching morning light spill across the parking lot. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped by the day ahead. She turned back to Keanu, her voice soft but steady. "I want to do it," she said, "but only if the music helps people who feel invisible." Keanu nodded, the quiet pride in his eyes unmistakable. "Then that's exactly what we'll make." Marla exhaled with relief, already smiling. Lena felt something shift inside her, warm and bright. She wasn't just trending, she was beginning again. While Lena's world was changing inside a quiet motel room, another woman sat alone in a small apartment 2 states away, staring at the glowing screen of her phone. Lena Dawson had found the video by accident. A coworker had sent it to her with the message, "This made me cry. You have to hear her." Tina clicked the link, expecting another viral clip that would fade from memory by morning. But when the woman on screen lifted her guitar and sang the first trembling line, Tina's breath stopped. She leaned closer, her eyes widening as recognition slammed into her chest. The voice was older, roughened, but it was unmistakable. It was Lena, her sister. The sister she hadn't seen since their mother's funeral. The sister she believed had chosen to disappear. The sister she'd begged to stay to try again to let the family help. And when Lena walked out the door that last night, Tina told herself she was done trying to fix someone who didn't want saving. She never imagined Lena had fallen this far. She never imagined she was homeless. Watching the video, seeing the pain in her expression and the courage in her voice shattered every story Tina had told herself to survive the heartbreak. Her hands trembled as she held the phone. She replayed the video once, then again, each time catching details she'd missed. The way Lena's shoulders tightened before each verse. The way her eyes closed on the last note like she was praying the world would understand her. Tina pressed her palm to her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. Guilt made her chest ache. "I should have looked for you," she whispered. "I should have tried harder." Her fingers hovered over Lena's old phone number. She hadn't dialed it in years, afraid of what she might hear, or worse, the silence she might not survive. But now the fear of not calling at all was even heavier. She pressed the call button. The number was disconnected. Her breath caught. It felt like losing Lena all over again, but she was not giving up this time. She searched online for Dogstar Studios, for Keanu Reeves, for any mention of Lena's name. Within minutes, she found the studio's public contact email and sent a message with shaking hands. She didn't know if anyone would see it. She didn't know if it mattered. But it was a start. Across the country in Los Angeles, Keanu sat with his laptop open reviewing nonprofit projects tied to the newly formed Voices Unheard label. When the email notification pinged, he almost ignored it, but something in the subject line made him pause. "I think the singer in your video is my sister. Please help me reach her." He read the message twice, then a third time. The tone was soft, scared, loving. A woman who wasn't looking for fame or money. A woman looking for family. He sent a reply within minutes, asking for a phone number and offering a private call. 2 hours later, he was speaking to Tina, who cried so quietly he had to lean forward just to hear her breathing. She told him everything. Their childhood, their mother's long illness, Lena's guilt, their last fight, the years of silence that followed. "I thought she left because she didn't love us anymore," Tina whispered, "but she was drowning and I didn't see it. I should have seen it." Keanu waited until her voice steadied before speaking. "She's safe now," he said gently, "and she's not alone anymore." "Can I see her?" Tina asked. "Please, I don't want to overwhelm her. I need her to know I never stopped loving her." Keanu understood the weight of estranged family better than most. He promised her he would arrange something quiet, something gentle, something meant for healing rather than spectacle, and he knew exactly where to do it. Keanu chose his private rehearsal space for the reunion, a quiet room tucked behind the main studio building. Sunlight streamed through high windows, warming the wooden floors. Instruments lined the walls in gentle silence, and a single table held tissues and 2 cups of chamomile tea. He wanted a place that felt safe, gentle, and private. A place where 2 sisters could rediscover each other without the noise of the outside world. When Lena arrived, she thought she was meeting with Keanu about the next steps for the label. She carried her guitar out of habit, the strap warm against her shoulder. But as soon as she stepped into the room, she sensed something different. Keanu's expression was softer than usual, his posture careful, almost protective. "There's someone here who wants to see you," he said quietly. Before she could ask who, the side door opened. Tina stepped inside. Lena froze. Her breath vanished. It felt like her heart forgot how to beat. Tina looked older than she remembered, lines around her eyes, hair pulled back in a neat bun, but the tenderness in her face was unmistakable. Tina whispered, her voice shaking. Lena swallowed hard tears, already blurring her vision. "Tina, how did you find me?" "I saw the video," Tina said, stepping closer. "I heard your voice, and I knew it was you. I thought you were gone. I thought I'd lost you forever." Lena shook her head as tears slipped down her cheeks. "I didn't want you to see me like I was. I didn't want to be your burden." You were never a burden, Tina cried softly. You were my sister, and I should have looked for you. I should have fought for you. The distance between them dissolved. Lena dropped her guitar gently to the floor as Tina rushed forward. They embraced with the force of years breaking open, their shoulders shaking, their tears spilling into each other's hair. Memories flooded back their childhood bedroom songs, whispered before sleep, their mother's warm hands guiding them through grief. You never stopped being my hero, Tina said through tears. I just didn't know where to find you. Lena held her tighter, feeling a piece of her heart return home. Keanu stepped back quietly, giving them the room they deserved. The space filled with the kind of silence that heals, not the kind that isolates. For the first time in years, Lena felt whole. The world's reaction to Lena's voice spread faster than anyone expected. Within days, major record labels were sending emails, voice messages, and even physical letters to Dogstar Studios. Some were polite, some were pushy. All of them were eager. They wanted the woman whose voice had cracked open millions of hearts. They wanted the story. They wanted the momentum. They wanted the miracle. But Lena didn't feel like a miracle. She felt fragile, new, still piecing herself together after years of surviving in silence. She sat in Keanu's garden 2 mornings after her reunion with Tina, surrounded by the soft rustle of bamboo and the scent of jasmine drifting in from the trellis. The sun warmed the stones beneath her feet, and birds hopped along the low wall as if eavesdropping. Keanu poured tea into 2 simple ceramic cups he kept outside for quiet moments like this. Lena cupped hers in both hands, grateful for the warmth. Marla said there are 12 offers, Lena murmured. 14, Keanu corrected gently. 2 came in overnight. She sighed and let the steam wash over her face. What do they want from me? He slid a small stack of printed proposals across the patio table. Everything, he said, your voice, your story, your image, your control. She didn't touch the papers. Instead, she stared at them like they might bite. What's typical? She asked. For a new artist, he said, quietly. This is a lot. They usually don't offer this much money up front, but you're not a typical artist right now. Lena's stomach tightened. Because I went viral, because you went truthful, Keanu said. There's a difference. They don't understand that difference, but we do. She looked down at her hands, remembering nights. Her fingertips bled from playing her grandfather's guitar, trying to stay warm and unseen. Now, those same hands were being chased by companies promising to polish her brand and shape her message. She had fled from control her whole life. She wasn't ready to fall into it again. What would you do? She asked softly. Keanu leaned back in his chair, letting the morning breeze brush through his hair. A thoughtful smile curved gently across his face. I'd protect the art, he said, and protect the story. Lena breathed out slowly as if those words untangled something inside her. So, you'd say no, I'd say no to control, he replied. To contracts that shape you into something easier to sell, but I wouldn't say no to opportunity. Just the wrong kind. She finally touched one of the proposals, flipping it open. The pages were filled with phrases like creative direction, image alignment, and public narrative management. She closed it after only a moment. I don't want them telling me who to be, she whispered. They didn't see me when I was on the street. They didn't hear me until now. Exactly, Keanu said. But you get to choose who hears you next. She looked up, her eyes clearing with a new firmness. Then, I want to choose what feels real. I don't want to sign away my voice just because they're offering attention. Keanu nodded. Then let's make your music your way. I'll support you all the way through. Lena felt a lightness settle into her chest, unexpected but steady. What does that look like? Independent release, he said. Your EP, your message. No compromises. The idea frightened her. It also thrilled her. Can we really do that? She asked. A quiet grin warmed his face. We can. And we will. He reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts. But we won't do it alone. Keanu tapped a name on his phone and held it out toward Lena with a small smile. First call, a friend of mine, one of the best mixers in the world. He owes me more than a few favors. He winked gently, softening the weight of the moment. And he loves helping artists with real stories. Lena's eyes widened. You mean a Grammy-winning mixer? For my songs. For your truth, he corrected. He'll understand what you're building. Before she could fully absorb that, he scrolled again. Second call. A gospel choir director I've known for years. When she heard your video, she called me before I could call her. She said your voice sounds like someone pulling themselves out of the fire, and she wants to help carry the sound. Lena placed a hand over her chest, steadying the sudden rush of emotion. A choir behind her music, she could hardly imagine it. The idea felt too big, too bright, almost unreal. And you're sure I'm ready for all this, she whispered. You're not ready, Keanu said gently. You're willing. There's a difference. Willing is how people begin. She let those words settle into her heart. Being willing meant not running from her own potential. It meant trusting that she was allowed to try again. Keanu stood and walked toward the edge of the garden, where a small stone fountain trickled softly. There's one more thing, he said. Something we'll start quietly. Something for you, not for the world. She followed him, curiosity softening the fear that still lingered. I spoke with a documentary team I trust, he continued. People who know how to disappear into the background. They want to capture your journey, not the fame, not the noise, the healing, the music, the truth of what it means for someone invisible to become seen again. Lena inhaled sharply. A documentary about me. About what you represent, he said. About the people your voice speaks for. Her throat tightened. She thought of the women she'd slept beside in shelters, the men who tried to stay warm under highway bridges, the teens who ran away from homes that didn't love them. She thought of how many stories never reached a microphone. I'm not used to being seen, she said quietly. I know, he replied. That's why we'll do this with care. No pressure, no publicity until you're ready. You decide what gets filmed. You decide what stays private. Lena felt the fear begin to loosen. This wasn't exploitation. This wasn't spectacle. This was someone offering her control over her own narrative. She looked at the stack of label offers on the table behind them, then at Keanu's steady expression. Let's turn them all down, she said. Every single one. A warm breeze rustled through the bamboo as if applauding. Keanu nodded with quiet pride. Good. Now we make the EP your way. And for the first time since her world began falling apart, Lena felt the future open instead of closing. She felt like she belonged to it. The community center looked nothing like the venues Lena imagined musicians performed in. The walls were painted a pale blue, chipped in certain corners. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows. Handmade posters about food drives, clothing donations, and peer counseling lined the hallways. It felt humble, lived in, and real. And maybe that was why Keanu chose it. Because the people who walked these halls understood the world Lena came from. The team worked quietly around her, setting up cameras, testing microphones, adjusting cables. This wasn't a commercial production. It wasn't a corporate launch. It was a gathering. A moment meant for the people who had lived through silence and needed to know they were not alone. The EP was titled Streetlight Songs, a name Lena chose after remembering how many nights she had sung under the dim glow of street lamps just to stay warm. Now those songs were being released into the world not as entertainment, but as testimony. Marla handed Lena a warm cup of lemon tea as she stood backstage. Nervous, she asked gently. Yes, Lena admitted, terrified. That means you care, Marla said. You're ready. Lena nodded, though her fingers trembled around the cup. She wore a simple black dress borrowed from Marla's closet and boots she had picked up from a thrift shop. Her curls framed her face softly, and a small pin shaped like a tiny guitar sat on her dress, a gift from Tina, who stood quietly in the back row, both proud and emotional. The small stage lights flickered on. The live stream countdown pulsed in the corner of the monitor. Hundreds of viewers were already waiting. Then thousands, numbers rising with every passing second. Keanu walked over, his hands tucked in the pockets of his jacket. You don't have to prove anything tonight, he said quietly. Just sing for the people who lived this with you. She took a steadying breath. That's the plan. When her name was introduced, Lena stepped onto the stage. The room fell into a stillness that felt sacred. Her guitar rested comfortably against her hip, warm from her hands. She adjusted the microphone and scanned the small audience volunteers, community members, sheltered families, her sister. And at the very back, Keanu watching with steady encouragement. This song, she began, voice trembling slightly, is called When They See Me. It's about the gap between what people think they're looking at and who a person really is. Someone in the front row wiped a tear before she even started. Lena closed her eyes. Her fingers found the first chord, soft but sure. The melody rose from a place deep inside her, shaped by nights she remembered too well. Nights when strangers crossed the street to avoid her. Nights when she wondered if she would ever be seen again. Her voice carried those memories, gently weaving truth into the lyrics. They see the clothes, not the story. They see the face, not the fight. They see the shadow on the sidewalk, but never ask about the light. The room was silent, absorbing every line. The live stream chat began flooding faster than the moderators could keep up. This sounds like my brother. My mom was Lena. I was Lena. My son is still on the streets. Thank you for this. This song hurts, but in a good way. Lena opened her eyes as she reached the final chorus. She wasn't singing as a performer. She was singing as someone who had lived every word. If you'd only look a little closer, you'd see the heart behind the name. When they see me, when they see me, I hope they never look the same. The last note lingered warm and trembling. The room remained silent for a heartbeat, then two. And then someone in the third row stood up slowly. A single clap, another, and then the entire community center rose to its feet, applause filling the air like a wave of gratitude and recognition. Lena held the microphone close, tears gathering in her eyes. She had sung for the forgotten, and the forgotten had answered. As the applause softened, Lena stepped back from the microphone, letting the guitar rest gently at her side. Her breath shook with relief and disbelief. For years she had sung to survive. Now she was singing to be heard. The emotions pressed against her chest so powerfully she had to steady herself. The live stream chat continued to pour in messages. My brother didn't make it, but he would have loved this. Someone please tell her she's saving lives tonight. I'm in tears. This is the first time I've felt hope in months. Lena wiped her cheek, overwhelmed. She had expected a few viewers, maybe a small reaction. She had not expected the flood of stories from people who saw themselves in her words. The room itself felt transformed. It wasn't a community center anymore. It was a place where bruised hearts recognized one another and felt less alone. She looked to the side of the stage. Keanu stood in the wings, watching quietly. He gave her a small nod, not a gesture of approval, but a gesture of presence, a promise that she wasn't doing this alone. The host thanked the viewers and signaled that the concert would close with a final moment from Lena. Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know how to wrap words around the enormity of what she felt. Then Keanu stepped onto the stage. He didn't take the microphone. He didn't speak. He walked until he stood beside her, placing one steady hand on her shoulder. Cameras flashed lightly, but he ignored them. He stood with her facing the crowd and the live stream, as if to say that her voice, her story, her truth deserved to be held, not just witnessed. Lena felt her breath calm. Her shoulders relaxed beneath his hand. The entire room watched them in a quiet, reverent stillness. For the first time in her life, she wasn't singing alone. She wasn't surviving alone. And as the screen faded to black, millions watching felt the same shift, a reminder that every forgotten person carries a song worth hearing. The morning after the community center concert, Lena woke with a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't relief, it wasn't pride, it was purpose. The messages from the live stream were still echoing in her mind, especially the ones from people who said her song felt like their own story. She realized then that her music was no longer just about survival. It was about connection, about lifting voices that had been ignored for too long. Keanu felt the same shift. He arrived at the studio early carrying blueprints rolled under his arm and a quiet fire in his eyes. When Lena walked in still sleepy and clutching a cup of tea, he gestured toward the spread of papers on the table. "I want to show you something," he said. She approached cautiously, unsure of what she was looking at. The papers showed sketches of an old church, arched windows, wooden beams, a wide sanctuary hall. It looked abandoned, forgotten, and yet full of possibility. "What is this place?" she asked. "It's on the east side," Keanu said. "Used to be a small neighborhood church. Closed down a decade ago. It's been empty ever since." Lena traced a finger over the drawn doorway. "It looks beautiful." "It will be," he replied. "I bought it yesterday." She froze. "You bought a church?" Keanu smiled gently. "I bought a building. What it becomes is up to us." Lena didn't speak at first. She wanted to understand what he saw in these blueprints, what vision had driven him to make such a sudden decision. But as she looked closer, she saw more details: rooms labeled studio, dining, practice hall, and shelter dorm. Her heart squeezed. "This isn't for me," she whispered. "It's for them. For all of you," he said softly. "For every musician whose story never got heard because life pushed them into the shadows." Her throat tightened with emotion. "What are you calling it?" "I was thinking," he said, "the Lena Dawson Music Haven." Her hand flew to her chest. No, Keanu. I can't. I don't deserve." "You do," he said firmly. Your voice lit this spark. "This isn't a tribute. It's a beginning." Lena blinked rapidly as tears filled her eyes. "What exactly will this haven do?" "Everything we wish had existed before the streets took so much from you," he answered. "Shelter, warm meals, a safe place to sleep. Instruments available for anyone who wants to learn or play, recording equipment, teachers, mentors, community." Lena shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. "Keanu, this is huge. This is necessary," he finished. She sank into a chair, staring again at the blueprints. The sanctuary space, wide and open, would become a performance hall. The smaller rooms would become practice spaces. The old basement would be transformed into a shelter wing with beds and lockers. It felt like someone had taken her dreams from childhood, the ones she'd tucked away long before life hardened her, and laid them out in ink and lines. "But it can't be run by people who don't understand," she said quietly. "It needs people who've lived through it, who know what it feels like to have nothing." He nodded. "Exactly what I was hoping you'd say." Lena looked up surprised. "I don't want this to become another charity project built from the outside," Keanu said. "It has to come from the community it's meant to serve. That's the only way it works." She nodded slowly, understanding. "Then I want former shelter residents involved, people who've survived the streets and can guide others through it, people who won't judge. We'll bring them in," he said, "every step of the way." Construction began faster than Lena expected. Keanu worked quietly behind the scenes, never announcing anything publicly, never drawing attention to himself. He made calls to local businesses, small music shops, community nonprofits, and former collaborators. The response was overwhelming. Within days, donations poured in. Acoustic guitars, old pianos, trumpets needing polish, microphones, blankets, sheet music, food vouchers, art supplies. One local business owner arrived at the church with an entire van full of used instrument cases. "I heard her song," he said simply. "It reminded me why I opened my shop in the first place." Former shelter residents stepped forward too. One woman offered to teach voice lessons twice a week. A man who had once slept under an overpass volunteered to run evening workshops on songwriting. A retired guitarist who used to busk on the Santa Monica Pier offered to mentor teens. Each person added a piece of themselves to the haven, and slowly the empty church transformed into a living, breathing sanctuary. Lena visited daily, sometimes helping paint walls, sometimes unpacking donations, sometimes simply walking through the space and imagining the lives that would find refuge there. She felt different when she was in the building, less like a guest in someone else's world and more like someone reclaiming her own. During one late afternoon visit, she found Keanu in the old sanctuary, standing beneath the stained glass window that filtered soft colors across the new wooden stage. He was adjusting cables with focused care. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked softly. "Really?" He paused, then looked at her with a gentle honesty she had come to trust. "Because you sang," he said, "and I listened." Those words settled into her heart with a weight she could feel in her bones. It was never about charity. It was never about fame or publicity. It was about connection. It was about hearing someone who had been silent for too long and choosing not to walk away. Lena stepped onto the small stage beside him, letting her fingers glide across the railing. "This place is going to save people," she whispered. Keanu nodded. "It already is." She believed him. For the first time since her life unraveled, Lena felt the ground beneath her feet turn steady again. Not because she was being lifted, but because she was helping build something that lifted others too. The Haven wasn't just a shelter, it was a promise. 6 months passed, and the Lena Dawson Music Haven was no longer an idea on blueprints. It was alive. The sanctuary echoed with laughter, guitar strings, harmonies, and footsteps full of possibility. The shelter wing stayed full every night. Former buskers recorded their first songs. Teenagers who had once been too shy to speak were learning piano scales. And Lena, once unsure if she belonged anywhere, had become the heart of the place. Her EP Streetlight songs grew steadily too, not explosively like the viral video, but in a way that felt meaningful. Listeners kept returning to it because it carried truth. It carried lived experience. It carried dignity. One morning in early spring, as sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Haven, Keanu walked in, holding a letter with a raised seal. He found Lena kneeling beside a young boy, helping him tune an old violin. When she looked up, she saw something gentle and important in his eyes. "I think this is for you," he said, handing her the envelope. She stood wiping dust from her hands and opened it carefully. The paper inside felt heavy, official, and she didn't understand what she was looking at first. Then her breath caught. "It's from the Kennedy Center," she whispered. Keanu nodded. "They're hosting a benefit concert for housing initiatives nationwide. They want you to perform." Lena stared at the letter, unable to comprehend the magnitude of it. The Kennedy Center was a world she had watched from afar, unattainable, unreachable, reserved for the people she admired on television or heard through old speakers in music rooms. She had never imagined stepping inside as anything other than a visitor, certainly not as a performer. "Why would they want me?" she murmured. Keanu's answer was immediate. "Because your voice carries the truth of people they forget to invite." The days that followed were a blur of preparation. The Haven community encouraged her with quiet pride. Tina insisted on helping her choose something elegant but simple to wear, nothing flashy, just soft earth tones that complemented her calm presence. The gospel choir director sent her late-night texts filled with encouragement. Even the children at the Haven made her cards that said things like, "Sing brave and take us with you." When the evening of the benefit arrived, Lena walked into the Kennedy Center, holding her guitar case tightly. The grand marble halls, the warm lighting, the polished floors. It all felt like a dream she hadn't yet claimed as her own. She was escorted backstage where performers warmed their voices and event organizers moved with hurried precision. Keanu met her there, wearing a dark suit and an expression that mixed pride, steadiness, and quiet emotion. "You ready?" he asked softly. "No," she whispered, "but I'll go anyway. That's the spirit of every great artist I've ever known." She stepped onto the wings of the stage and peeked out. The theater was full. Thousands of people sat in velvet seats dressed in evening gowns and tailored jackets. The audience represented power influence policy, people who made decisions, people who rarely heard from those living on the margins. Her name was announced. The applause felt distant, almost happening underwater. She walked onto the stage, guided only by the warm glow of the spotlights and the familiar weight of her guitar. She sat on the stool placed in the center of the stage. For a moment, she closed her eyes, grounding herself the way she used to on cold sidewalks beneath streetlights. When she opened them again, The vast room felt smaller, quieter, as if waiting to hear something it had never heard before. Lena took a slow breath as her fingers brushed the first chord. The sound echoed through the hall with a gentleness that surprised her. It didn't shake. It didn't falter. It simply existed, steady and warm. She lifted her voice into the silence, singing the opening lines of her new piece, dedicated to the people still living in the shadows. The melody was simple, almost fragile, but it carried through the vast room with quiet strength. She sang about the women who hummed to themselves under freeway bridges, the men who carried stories no one had asked to hear, the teens who wrote lyrics in the margins of shelter pamphlets, the souls who had been treated as background noise for too long. The audience leaned in, drawn by the sincerity in her voice. This wasn't a polished performance crafted to impress. It was truth shaped into sound. When she reached the final verse, her voice softened into something almost like a prayer. For the voices still unheard, may your silence find a home. May your stories cross the distance, till no one stands alone. When the last note faded, she remained still, letting the silence breathe. For a moment, no one clapped. No one moved. It was the kind of quiet that meant something had reached them, truly reached them. Then the applause rose, not loud and explosive, but deep and resonant. A standing ovation built slowly, row by row, like a wave rolling forward from the back of the hall. Lena's chest tightened with emotion she hadn't expected. She set her guitar down carefully. Before she could stand, the host motioned her toward a small microphone at the front of the stage. Lena approached it hesitantly. She hadn't planned a speech. She hadn't prepared anything. But the room waited. Her voice trembled, but did not break. "You saved my life by listening," she said. "What would happen if we all listened more?" The room went completely silent. Somewhere in the wings, Keanu swallowed hard, eyes shining. He had heard these words before, in different forms from different people. But coming from Lena, coming from someone who had been invisible for so long, they carried a weight he felt in his chest. Lena stepped back as the applause returned, stronger now, but she didn't bask in it. She simply bowed her head, humble and grateful. She had spoken for millions, and the world had listened. The flight back to Los Angeles was quiet. Lena stared out the window, watching the lights of Washington fade into darkness beneath the plane. Her guitar rested in the overhead bin, but her thoughts were heavier than any instrument she carried. The Kennedy Center performance felt surreal, almost like she had stepped into someone else's life for a moment. Yet the words she spoke at the microphone still echoed inside her. "You saved my life by listening." She wondered if the world understood that listening could be an act of rescue. She wondered if she had said too much, or not enough. When they landed in LA, the air felt warmer, softer. The Haven van picked them up at the terminal, but instead of heading straight to the community center, Keanu asked the driver to take them to his home in the hills. He'd said he wanted to talk, and though he didn't explain why, Lena sensed it wasn't something meant for a busy studio hallway or a public space. The garden behind his house glowed with string lights draped across bamboo poles. The stones were cool beneath their shoes as they stepped outside. A kettle steamed on a small outdoor burner, filling the air with the scent of chamomile and honey. It was the same quiet space where they had reviewed label contracts months earlier, the place where her future had begun to shift. Tonight, though, the atmosphere felt different. Something heavier sat in the silence. Keanu poured 2 cups and handed one to her, then sat on the low wooden bench across from her. The trees rustled gently in the breeze, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Keanu exhaled. "I'm proud of you," he said softly. "You handled the Kennedy Center with more grace than most seasoned performers." Lena lowered her gaze. "I almost fainted." "You didn't," he replied. "And that matters." A small smile tugged at her lips, but she could see something distant in his eyes, something unspoken. She set her cup down slowly. "You said you wanted to talk?" she said. "Is everything okay?" He looked down at his hands, clasping them loosely. "I realized something tonight," he began. something I've avoided admitting out loud. Her heartbeat quickened, concerned. What is it? He hesitated, searching for the right words. People keep saying I saved you, that I rescued you from the streets, that I'm some kind of hero in your story. He shook his head, and it bothers me more than I know how to explain. Lena's breath caught. Why? He looked up, eyes steady but pained. Because it isn't true. I didn't save you. You saved yourself. You walked into that studio. You told your story through your songs. You did the work. I just didn't walk away when I heard you. She felt something tighten in her chest, not out of hurt, but out of recognition. She had heard similar phrases before from people who cared about her, but never with this kind of vulnerability. Keanu, she said gently, you were there when no one else was. I was present, he said softly, but I wasn't your savior. I don't ever want you to feel like you owe me your life. I don't ever want the world to paint me into some role I'm not meant to play. She blinked, processing his words. He wasn't rejecting responsibility. He was rejecting glorification. And suddenly she saw the grief behind his eyes, the grief of a man who had lost many people in silence, who had carried their memories with humility because he never wanted to stand above them. He wasn't afraid of being seen. He was afraid of being misunderstood. Lena held her breath, letting his words settle into the quiet space between them. For the first time since she met him on that cold sidewalk, she saw not the calm, steady figure the world admired, but a man carrying his own invisible weight. A man who gave without asking, who listened without demanding, who had been lifted into the role of hero so many times that the title felt more like a misunderstanding than a compliment. She shifted closer, her voice soft. Is that why you looked sad tonight? Even with all the applause, Keanu sighed, his shoulders lowering. I've lost people I loved. I've walked through grief so thick, it felt like breathing underwater. And through all of it, strangers insisted on putting me on a pedestal I never asked for. They wanted me to be stronger, wiser, braver than I felt. But most days, he paused, choosing honesty over composure. Most days I'm just trying to make it through without breaking. Lena's eyes warmed with empathy. You don't have to be perfect for me. A small, sad smile touched his lips. But the world thinks I am. She shook her head. The world doesn't know you. I do. He looked at her, then truly looked as if weighing whether he could trust her with the parts of himself he usually kept tucked away. When he spoke again, his voice carried years of unspoken truth. I didn't help you because I wanted to be seen as good, he said. I helped you because when I heard you sing, I heard someone who understood silence the way I do, not the peaceful kind, the kind that hurts. Lena felt tears sting her eyes. I knew that night you weren't saving me, she whispered. You were standing beside me. That's different. He bowed his head. I needed you to know that. I didn't want our story to become another narrative where I'm the rescuer and you're the rescued. You're stronger than anyone gives you credit for, including yourself. Her voice trembled. You didn't save me, Keanu, but you stayed. And that's what saved me. The words hovered in the air, warm and steady. Two wounded souls, not fixing each other, not carrying each other, just walking forward together. Keanu let out a breath that sounded like release. He lifted his cup, took a slow sip, and let the quiet wash over them in a way that felt healing rather than heavy. For the first time since they left Washington, the tension in his eyes eased. Lena reached for her guitar, strummed a soft chord, and spoke gently. We don't have to be perfect, she said. We just have to keep showing up. He nodded. And in the stillness of the garden, they did exactly that. 1 year passed, though, to Lena, it felt like both a lifetime and a single breath. The street corner where she once sang for loose change had long faded into memory. Now she stood in a place she never imagined she would see from the inside, much less stand upon as a performer. The Grand Ole Opry. The wooden circle beneath her feet carried decades of voices, footsteps, and stories. Tonight, hers would join them. The lights dimmed, the crowd murmured in anticipation, and Lena stepped out from the wings wearing a simple black dress and holding her grandfather's guitar close to her chest. The same guitar that survived cold nights, gas station sinks, and alleyway shelters. The same guitar that kept her alive when nothing else did. As she walked to the center of the stage, she spotted them instantly. In the front row, Tina sat with her hands clasped tightly, eyes bright with pride. On one side of her were two former residents from the Haven, both smiling with the unmistakable look of people who'd fought their way back from the margins. On the other side, steady and quiet as always, sat Keanu. He gave her a small nod, the same reassuring gesture he gave her the first day she stepped into Dogstar Studios. The stage was quiet, the air soft, the moment sacred. The moment. Lena adjusted the microphone and let her fingers drift across the guitar strings. The first few notes rang out, warm and steady, filling the vast room. The crowd leaned in. They knew her story. Many had followed her journey from the raw online clip that went viral to the EP that became a lifeline for countless people who felt unheard. But tonight's song was different. It was new. It was hers. She introduced it gently. This song is called Still Here. It's for anyone who's ever felt invisible. Anyone who survived a night they thought would break them. Anyone who's still standing. A hush fell over the room. She began to sing. Her voice carried strength, sorrow, and triumph all at once. It rose from the scars in her past, soared across the room, and wrapped itself around every listener. The lyrics told of cracked sidewalks, empty nights, and the impossibility of hope. But the chorus rose like a sunrise. I'm still here, still breathing, still fighting for the light I almost lost. Keanu bowed his head for a moment, overwhelmed. Tina pressed a hand to her heart. The crowd was silent, mesmerized by a voice that once shook the walls of a small Los Angeles studio and now filled one of the most iconic stages in America. When the final note faded, the room did not cheer immediately. It breathed. It absorbed. And then, as if pulled by the same heartbeat, the audience rose to their feet. The applause rolled over her like a wave, warm and powerful. Lena bowed through tears she could no longer hold back. Backstage, after the show ended and the lights dimmed, Lena found a quiet corner to breathe. Her heart was full. Her sister held her in a long embrace, whispering how proud she was. Keanu placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and told her she had just made history without even trying. But Lena's attention shifted when she noticed someone lingering near the hallway wall. A young woman, thin, nervous, wearing a faded hoodie and gripping the strap of a worn backpack. Her eyes carried a familiar look, one Lena had seen in her own reflection many times. The young woman swallowed hard when Lena approached. Your song, it meant something to me, she said in a shaky voice. I'm living in my car. I write music too. I didn't think anyone would ever want to hear it. Lena felt a deep ache of recognition. She smiled softly and asked the question she once heard from a stranger on a street corner. Do you have your guitar? The young woman nodded slowly. I do. Lena stepped aside, giving space. Then take it out. And like the beginning of her own story, she listened. The young woman hesitated before unzipping her backpack. Her hands trembled as she pulled out a small travel guitar, its body scratched and dulled from years of hard living. She held it protectively, almost apologetically, as if expecting someone to judge it unworthy of the space it occupied. Lena didn't smile out of pity. She smiled out of recognition. Take your time, she said gently. The hallway was quiet enough to hear the hum of distant stage equipment being packed away. The girl settled on a small stool and took a shaky breath before placing her fingers on the strings. The first chord buzzed slightly. She winced, corrected her grip, and tried again. The second chord rang clearer. Then she began to sing. Her voice was soft, almost whisper-like, yet carried a rawness that tightened Lena's chest. The lyrics were simple. A girl searching for warmth, nights spent on asphalt, a promise she made to herself to keep going until someone finally saw her. Lena felt her throat tighten. Tina stood nearby, wiping her eyes. Even Keanu, who had planned to step outside to give them privacy, stopped mid-step and leaned quietly against the doorway, listening. When the last note faded, the girl lowered her gaze. "Sorry," she whispered. "I'm not very good. I had to try." Lena knelt in front of her, placing a steady hand on the girl's shoulder. "Don't apologize," she said. "That was honest. And honest is where real music starts." The girl swallowed hard tears, threatening to spill. "No one's ever listened to me before." Lena felt her heart ache with memory. "I know how that feels," she said. "And I also know what it means when someone finally does." The girl looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. Do you think I could get better?" Lena squeezed her shoulder gently. "You already have something real. The rest we can work on together." The girl's breath hitched. Lena nodded. "Come by the Haven tomorrow. Bring your guitar. Let's start there." Behind them, Keanu smiled quietly, recognizing the moment for what it was, a story ending, and another beginning. The year that followed Lena's Opry performance became something she never could have predicted during the long nights she slept behind recycling bins or bussed herself to public libraries just to stay warm. Her days were no longer shaped by survival. They were shaped by purpose. And that purpose, as she discovered, was far bigger than her voice or her story. She became a mentor at the Music Haven, not because Keanu asked her to, but because she couldn't imagine doing anything else. She arrived early each morning before sunrise, unlocking the worn wooden doors of the repurposed church and stepping into a space that felt sacred in a way her old life never prepared her for. The hallways were lined with donated instruments, some old, some new, all polished with care. Posters of artists from every generation filled the walls, and each room held people who had spent years being overlooked until someone finally showed them a sliver of belief. Lena taught small songwriting workshops at first. She wasn't sure if she was ready to guide anyone, but the young woman she met backstage at the Opry, whose name she learned was Alyssa, kept showing up with her guitar and her notebook. And soon others followed, women from shelters, teens who aged out of foster care, men who had lost everything and were trying to rebuild. They gathered in a circle every week, sharing lyrics written in spiral notebooks and on the backs of grocery receipts. One morning, Lena listened as a woman named Denise sang a trembling verse about losing custody of her son because she couldn't find stable housing. The song cut straight through Lena's heart. After Denise finished, the room fell silent until Lena knelt beside her and said quietly, "Your story deserves a place in the world." From that moment, the seed of a bigger idea began to form. Within a few months, that idea became a full project, an album created entirely by women living in shelters and transitional housing across Los Angeles. Lena co-produced it with one of Keanu's longtime collaborators, a gentle, gray-haired musician named Marcus, who believed in the power of unpolished truth. The album was called Home in the Waiting. Lena didn't sing a single track on it. She didn't need to. Her role was to help these women find the courage to tell their own stories. And they did. One track shook her to her core, a song written by a young mother about choosing between diapers and her own medication. Another was a spoken word piece by an older woman who had lived under an overpass for 15 years before finding stable housing. Each voice carried a universe. Each song was a reminder of how wide the world's blind spots could be. The movement grew faster than anyone expected. Local businesses donated microphones, guitars, and strings. Churches opened their fellowship halls for rehearsals. Volunteers lined up to bring food to the Haven. Every week, new faces appeared at the door, some nervous, some skeptical, all of them carrying stories too heavy to carry alone. And through it all, Keanu refused to be the center of it. When journalists tried to interview him about the Haven, he gently redirected them. "Ask Lena," he said. "Ask the artists. This isn't about me. It's about voices we almost lost." He repeated that same line so often that it became a quiet motto of the entire project. People painted it on the Haven walls. Artists whispered it before recording sessions. Even city leaders began quoting it when discussing new housing initiatives. But the moment everything shifted happened when Lena received a formal letter from Washington. She had been invited to speak before Congress. The invitation to speak before Congress felt unreal in Lena's hands. The envelope was heavy, the seal embossed, the language formal. She reread the letter 3 times before she finally believed it was real. The hearing was focused on housing instability and the role of community programs in restoring dignity. They wanted her to testify not as a celebrity story, but as a woman who had lived the reality millions face every day. When she told Keanu, he gave a small nod of pride. They couldn't have chosen a more honest voice. Lena traveled to Washington with a simple folder of handwritten notes. She didn't hire a speechwriter. She didn't rehearse in front of a mirror. She simply wrote what she knew to be true. When her turn came, the chamber felt overwhelming. At first, the raised dais, the rows of representatives' cameras pointed like unblinking eyes. But when she began to speak, everything softened. She told them about washing in gas station sinks. She told them about sleeping behind dumpsters. She told them about the guilt she carried for surviving when others didn't. She told them about the power of being listened to, truly listened to. Then she said the words that made the room fall silent. Housing isn't charity, it's dignity, and dignity is a human need, not a reward. Some members blinked back tears, others took furious notes. When her time ended, several approached her privately to thank her not for her story, but for her clarity. She left the chamber feeling both weightless and grounded, as though she had finally honored the girl she once was. Meanwhile, the Haven movement kept spreading. Musicians in Chicago launched a sister program. A community center in Nashville adopted their model. A small town in Oregon opened a shelter with a recording booth built from donated lumber. News outlets began referring to it as a cultural ripple effect started by a single street performance. But Keanu continued to sidestep attention. Reporters begged for sound bites. Magazines requested cover stories. One journalist even called the Haven the Keanu Reeves miracle. He rejected every interview. When someone asked him why he kept turning them down, he smiled politely and offered only one answer. This isn't about me. It's about voices we almost lost. And as the movement grew, city by city, artist by artist, Lena understood something deeply. A legacy wasn't built by being the loudest. It was built by helping others finally be heard. Lena sat alone in the rehearsal room at the Haven, the evening light falling in long golden stripes across the wooden floor. The building was quiet after a long day of lessons, laughter, and hesitant first songs from voices still learning to trust themselves. She held a folded piece of paper in her hands. The edges softened from being opened and closed again and again. It was the letter she had finally found the courage to write. Not to a critic, not to a lawmaker, not to the world, to herself, to the girl she used to be. She unfolded it slowly, smoothing the creases, and took a steady breath before reading aloud into the empty room. Dear younger me, I know you're scared. I know you're cold. I know the nights feel endless. You think no one sees you. You think you're fading. You think the world has already decided your worth. Her voice trembled, but she kept reading. You believe every door has closed for good. And you blame yourself for things you survived. You walk with your head low, hoping nobody recognizes the girl who lost her job, her home, and her place in the world. She paused, brushing a tear from her cheek before it could fall. But listen to me carefully. You are not invisible. You are not broken. You are music waiting to be heard. The words echoed softly against the walls. You think you sing because you have nothing left, but someday you will learn that you sing because there is still something inside you worth saving. And even if the world has forgotten you, even if people walk past you on sidewalks without seeing your face, there is someone out there who will stop, someone who will hear you, someone who will listen. Lena lowered the letter and placed it gently on the piano. She wiped her eyes and looked around the room, remembering every person who had walked through the doors of the Haven, unsure if they deserved to be there. Denise, who found her son again. Alyssa, who had just recorded her first demo. The older man who arrived with shaking hands and now taught fingerstyle guitar to teenagers who adored him. She stepped into the center of the room and lifted her guitar. A few young artists lingered nearby, finishing their practice, their faces tired but open. When she strummed the first gentle chord, they drifted toward her, gathering quietly, instinctively. She began to sing a soft, simple melody. Nothing grand, nothing polished. A lullaby for the forgotten, a reminder for the lost, a promise for anyone still standing at the edge of themselves. One by one, the young musicians added their voices, some tentative, some strong. The harmonies rose slowly, blending like threads forming a warm blanket. Lena felt her voice steady and lift, guided by the truth she had fought so long to understand. Just as the final chord hung in the air, the door at the back of the room opened. Keanu stepped inside without a word. No cameras, no staff, no spotlight. Just a quiet nod of recognition, the same nod he gave her the first day he listened on a cold street corner. She dipped her head in return gratitude, passing between them without a single sentence. And the voices rose again. The sound in the room deepened as more voices drifted in from the hallway. Some belonged to students who had been packing up their instruments. Others belonged to people who had simply paused on their way home, drawn in by the warm rise of harmony. No one asked what song they were singing. No one needed to. The melody carried a truth everyone understood. Lena felt the familiar tightness in her chest ease as she watched them gather. A year ago, she was singing alone on a cold sidewalk, invisible to the world. Now she stood in a room filled with voices that existed because someone had finally seen them. It was a quiet miracle, one built not on fame or headlines, but on listening. As the song softened, Lena lowered her guitar and looked at the faces around her. Some weary, some radiant, all of them carrying stories she now felt honored to help lift. She thought of the little girl she once was, singing into a hairbrush in her bedroom, believing music could change her life. She thought of the woman she became, fighting through darkness without knowing if daylight still existed. And she thought of the person she was, now not healed completely, but whole in a new, different way. She returned to the letter on the piano and picked it up again, not to read it aloud this time, but to add one last line. Her pen moved slowly, the words forming with care. You will learn that kindness is not a rescue, it is a bridge. She felt that truth more deeply than anything she had written before. A soft shuffle of footsteps approached. When she turned, Keanu stood beside her, watching the young musicians now experimenting with harmonies, laughing quietly, building something beautiful without even realizing it. He spoke softly. You gave them this. Lena shook her head. We gave it to each other. He nodded, accepting the correction with a small smile. That's how it should be. They watched the group for a moment, letting the sound swirl around them. One of the youngest students, a boy no older than 15, lifted his head and asked shyly, Ms. Dawson, are we done for tonight? Lena smiled. No, she said. We're just beginning. The room brightened with a ripple of laughter and renewed energy. Someone started drumming lightly on a chair. Another played a soft chord on an old keyboard. A girl hummed harmonies under her breath. The music was imperfect, unpolished, and real, exactly the kind she wished she'd had the courage to make years ago. She looked to Keanu once more. He didn't step forward. He didn't take over. He simply stayed blending into the background, the same way he did the day everything began. His quiet presence said enough. As the voices rose again, filling the room with hope and raw beauty, Lena felt something inside her settle into its rightful place. This isn't a story about being rescued, she whispered to herself, letting the words become the final truth of her journey. It's a story about being heard, and in that room, surrounded by voices once nearly lost to the world, she finally understood being heard was enough. Heard was